Paw Patrol, The Final Mission. Original video by The Shadow Reader. My name is Caitlin Michaels. I've worked for the Adventure Bay Police Department for about 15 years now. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but hey, at least it helps me pay the bills and put food on my table, so I guess I can't really complain. We always got calls for small problems such as cats in trees, small fires, or occasionally a missing person. So, like I said, not the most thrilling job in the world. However, one group of puppies changed my life and my job forever. They were called the Paw Patrol. To say they were a blessing would be a major understatement. To me, they were God's angels sent from heaven. I remember them almost perfectly. There was Chase, the police dog, Marshall, the fire dog, Zuma, the aquatic dog, Rubble, the construction dog, Rocky, the recycling dog, and Sky, the air dog. What's more, they had a 10-year-old leader named Ryder. He was a very mature and intelligent young man. One day, I even got to meet the Paw Patrol in person, and let me just say, it was quite the experience. The pups were very polite, well-mannered, respectful, and loved to play. They never wanted me to leave. They always wanted me to play fetch with them. However, that all changed about a year ago, and let me just say, it was something horrible. I was in my office getting some paperwork done when all of a sudden, the head of the police department, Chief Jackson, busted through the door and told us to drop what we were doing and go to the Adventure Bay forest area. I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "There's no time. I'll explain when we get there." It took us about 15-20 minutes to get to the forest area, and when we got out, we noticed that Ryder, Chase, Sky, and Rubble were standing outside the forest looking very scared. I asked them what the problem was, and Chase replied immediately, "It's Marshall, Rocky, and Zuma." "What about them?" I asked. "What's the problem?" "Well, they went down to the pond to go swimming 4 hours back," Chase began. "But they haven't come back since. We tried calling them, but they didn't answer. We tried tracking their collars, but we couldn't. We tried searching for them ourselves, but the forest is too dense to keep looking without getting lost." "Don't worry, Paw Patrol. I'll find them and bring them back safely," I said. "Maybe they took off their collars while they were swimming. They're probably still in the pond." Chase thanked me for my service, and I accepted it immediately. The chief split us into pairs to look for them. Me and my partner, Marie, went to the main part of the forest. We immediately started looking. 10 minutes turned to 15, then half an hour, then an hour, then 2 hours, then 3. After about 4 hours of searching, the sky began to darken. We immediately pulled out our flashlights and kept going. 2 minutes later, I felt something on my ankle. I shined my flashlight on it, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. It was one of the pup's collars. It looked like it had been yanked off by something. Or maybe someone. I could barely tell whose it was because the tag was scratched and covered in blood. If it weren't for the red fabric showing, I wouldn't have known it was Marshall's. After 10 more minutes, we kept looking and found Rocky's and Zuma's. Rocky's wasn't in too bad of shape, just yanked off. But Zuma's was in the worst shape. Not only was it yanked off and scratched, but it was also smashed to bits and the fabric was ripped. and all 3 of them were covered in blood. I was so scared. I hoped and prayed that the pups were safe. After about 20 minutes, I suddenly tripped and fell in some sort of puddle. I shined my flashlight on myself and suddenly got scared. I was covered in blood. I quickly stood up and inspected myself for any wounds, but there weren't any. I looked again at the red liquid, and it seemed to create a path through the forest. After about an hour, we were still following the blood, guns locked and loaded. I called out, "Marshall? Zuma? Rocky? Are you okay? If you can hear me, give me a bark!" But what I got as a response didn't sound good. Instead of a bark, I heard whimpering. I shined my flashlight straight ahead of me, and my heart sunk to the bottom of my chest. Holy shit! That's all I could make out. Less than 10 feet away from us were Zuma, Rocky, and Marshall. Or at least what was left of them. Zuma's head had been ripped straight from his body. His spinal cord was wrapped around the tree branch, holding the head firmly. His face was scratched and bloody. One of his eyes was stabbed by what I assumed was a sharp rock, blood still spewing out of the socket. His body lay close below, untouched and still intact. Rocky had been beaten numerous times by what I assumed was a large rock. His head was the main target of the brutal assault. His head was bruised and bloody and everything. The rest of his body was covered in teeth marks, with some of his fur ripped out. Marshall had been completely ripped in half, with guts, organs, and bones exposed, and blood still spewing out of his upper body. I immediately screamed when I saw this, and my partner called for backup. I happened to make my way over to the pups for any signs of life. Obviously, Zuma had been long dead at this point. I wasn't very surprised to find out that Rocky was still alive. He was just unconscious, or maybe sleeping because of the pain. However, Marshall was a completely different story. I assumed for him to be dead, but when I went over to check his pulse, there was one. He was also panting heavily, and he locked eyes with me. Oh my God, he's still conscious, I thought. Suddenly, he started crying, and he whispered to me, "Find my legs, please." I was too afraid to leave Marshall's side, so I called out for my partner to go and search for his back legs, which she found close to a bush. It didn't take too long for an ambulance to arrive. Zuma was pronounced dead on the spot. Rocky and Marshall were rushed to the emergency room. Rocky was fine after some help. However, Marshall passed away during surgery 2 hours later, probably due to blood loss. There was a funeral held for the fallen pups. They were buried in coffins shaped like the cars they drove for each mission. The mayor herself was there as well. There wasn't a single person that wasn't crying. And I know I don't usually cry during 911 emergencies, but that day, I bawled my eyes out like a fucking baby. Ryder, Sky, and Rubble couldn't even look at the coffins without crying, and Chase was simply inconsolable. He was sitting next to Marshall's coffin with a toy they used to share. If anyone tried to move him, he would just come closer to it and whimper, not even looking at you. The funeral ended with a 12-gunshot salute from me and my fellow cops. I went back to my apartment shortly after, Rocky by my side. A few days later, I received a disturbing phone call. Whoever it was said, "Help! Please! Blood everywhere! No! Ah!" And the line died. "That was Sky!" Rocky suddenly blurted out. "We have to help her!"